Hello, everybody. I'm slowly getting the hang of this. Not my forte. So our next speaker is Andy Horn. Andy is an architect based in Cape Town, South Africa. He's been working in natural materials across South Africa for many years, and is an experienced builder, designer, speaker, teacher, and trainer. He'll be speaking to us about a system of straw bale and clay slip. And I'm interested to see how it compares with the European Coboj project, which we saw this morning, from Caithness to Cape Town. So over to Andy, and I shall now leave.
Okay, well, thank you. This is a new experience for me, so speaking to a blank screen. Yeah, my talk is about what I've coined the term cob bale construction, because and basically it's an earth slip pre-coated straw bale building system, and that is labor based, and I found to be very well suited and tailored to low tech kind of building that we typically have work with here. So if I just quickly skizz through, I've got a lot of slides to get through. So just a quick insight into natural building in South Africa is ancient. So besides the indigenous population who mostly lived in beehive thatched kind of structures, weren't big into walls other than some of the Basotho that built stone. The settlers came with a lot of natural building skills, and because they weren't materials here, were forced or by naturally just used what they had. And there's good quality lime in the Cape, so we have evolved these very fancy gable works because of the kind of lime that we have. But so the double-story building you see there is the oldest clay straw building that I know of in South Africa. It's built in 1791, and it's in Genadendal. So that was light clay straw, and as you see, our lime plaster, we get very heavy wind-driven rains in winter and long periods of wet. So we need good plasters to protect. Although you'll see that even with the mud bricks, these are mud brick. The one on the right is actually mud brick. We still have quite a strong tradition of gables. Also come from the Dutch. So my own background, I initially had much. My first sort of experience with mud was light clay construction and cob. So I kind of would volunteer and pick up skills like that. And then in projects, you're faced with either the very basics of foot mixing and really very basic tools and so on, to bigger construction sites where you may have opportunity to faster mixing processes and so on. But generally you're dealing with labor, and in South Africa we have a wonderful opportunity to build through skills to build community. So that's kind of what also has attracted me to natural building is the social aspect. So if you look at straw, we have a lot of resources of straw in South Africa, and an engineering student estimated we could build 1 million homes a year with our annual renewable resource of straw, mostly wheat straw. Whereas our formal sector can only really build, apparently we only produce enough material to produce maybe 300,000 homes a year, and we have a massive housing backlog with shanty towns and so on. And we're just not meeting that need. So my first straw bale was a non-load bearing, so post and beam, and was built off a ruin. So the foundation was actually a ruin. We reused some of the mud bricks and filled in with straw bale, and then used cob, because that's what I kind of knew, and I knew cob would work with straw. So we kind of filled all the gaps and around windows and so on. You can see that's the restored ruin, and it went relatively quickly, but the plastering was onerous, and this is what constantly in my experience was that the walls would fly up, and then it would be sort of weeks and months of plastering to get a decent solid plaster on to finish the walls. So so there was a kind of frustration in that. And as you saw, sort of sometimes, you know, owner builders, so I would get pulled into quite a lot of owner builder type projects, and they don't have access to tractors and big machinery that can mix. So so that's another drawback with the kind of small type projects. And then this particular project was, I got asked to come in after it was already half designed, change the roof and so on. But this project was in Scarborough, which has very extreme winds and so on. And I was concerned that the only thing that would really protect the straw was a really solid layer of cob. So we kind of cobbed the clay plastered, but really compacted it with a stick, like the way we kind of learned to do cob, where you kind of knit the layers together. So we really did a solid cobbing on the outside. But that I just thought, after that project, it was like, well, there has to be a better way. It just takes too long. Although it did give us a very solid initial plaster. So this was a kind of evolution. So in the early days, we just following the books. You learn out of the books, and then you do it. You go on site and you build, and that's how you learn. There was no one to teach us here, and I couldn't fly overseas to go to courses or anything. So we started off with, you can see the sort of old method of putting metal pins in the bottom and so on, and then we'd kind of float the windows in the walls, and that was problematic as well at times. So then it kind of evolved, and you have a ladder plate on the bottom, and then you see this idea of that there had to be a better way to plaster and still get the solidity that I liked with the cob. You see, overseas they typically would spray on plasters with straw bale, and that takes kind of heavy machinery, skilled workers, and we have some of that with our pool contractors, but it's just not practical for owner builders and our general building team to be spraying on plasters. And we have a big tradition of hand plastering, but plastering onto a floppy surface is tricky. And when you have seen sprayed plasters, one guy did it here, and the walls were very hollow, the sounding. So it just didn't kind of feel right, that the walls weren't really that strong. So you can see with this idea of sort of, could I use a thinner mix of clay to get the mix into the bales, and then to speed up the plastering. So this is how it evolved. So you can see basically this is the first one I tried, and we just stacked the bales dry. You can see they're on the edge, and then we mixed up clay. The client is an owner builder. She had a bath, so spare bath that we mixed the clay in. We did add some, you can see it was quite pure clay, but we also mixed grog, some sand and gravel, which was what we had there, to give it more form. And then you can see we kind of dip the bales in, but they don't particularly go far in, so you kind of got to work that in, but I'll get to that. You can see we put this ladder plate on the bottom. We put poles typically, but sometimes ladders. Isolate the steel in the walls. That's a drip plate on the edge. This is a training project. It was kind of alteration, extension type of project. And there you can see, so we start by putting up the walls, fitting a dry wall, because the bales, you've got a custom cut to stagger the bonds, and so you want to get a kind of decent dry fit. So then what we do is and then the clay, we would prepare some clay. So typically, as I said, I like to go for more of a cob kind of mix, although typically clay straw is a much clayer, rich mix, so you can get away with a richer clay, but because of the way it works, ultimately I wanted the strength of what cob would give me, so I still kind of work with a typical cob mix, which has a blend of soils. So you can see we do very basic testing, compaction tests and sausage tests, a range of field tests to determine your mix, a good mix. Then you can see we get quite a sloppy mix. It's basically a yogurt-like consistency, and then you're dipping the bales in, depending, and only trying to coat the sides that are being exposed to plaster. So you can see here that the strings on the outside. So these are building on edge, and that's generally my preferred method. You can see there dipping it in. That's me. You can see how runny it is. So yes, while you just dip it, you don't just dip it. You also got to work it. So you work that clay into the surface, and you get typically around 70, 75, 100 mils into the outer surface of that bale. And the bales are about 400, 380 wide if they're on edge, or 450 if they're laid flat. So there you can see we've unstacked the bales row by row, so we know exactly where we're going to put them back. You start dipping the bottom course, which will obviously go on first, so it needs to start drying out sooner than the top course. So you do it row by row, and depending on the size of your team, you'll do it panel by panel. But then you half dry the cob, so the dipped bales, the cob bales. So you don't put it on while it's too wet. Sometimes, depending on the time frame, like I think these ones were right at the end of the day, and they were still a bit wet. But generally, you wait until they're almost dry, like the consistency of cob. So you're basically building with big sticky bricks of cob, and then as you build it up, you can see it goes fast. So you plastered, you've got a solid cob wall basically. It feels like cob because it sets and it's rock hard, but it's got all this insulation infused in it. And then as you can see, you stand it and compact it as you build. And the weight of the clay also helps to compact it. And you work that surface as you build. So here you can see we stake it. And so that's the kind of old methods. But when you build on edge, it's a sort of technique I've used. We sometimes you can see we use latta, what we'll call latta, timber saplings. And if you've laid the bales on edge, there are no strings on the top, so you can cut a groove into the top of your course, or basically every 2 or 3 courses of bales, and drop in a horizontal stabilizer, which you sort of knit around the vertical pins. So that also creates extra stability in the walls. And where this was a very high wind area, so it's kind of just extra belt and braces. That's that other project with the trainees. You can see, so that was at the end of the day, we had quite a big team, and they put up that whole wall with that solid plaster and worked it in one day. So normally that would have taken the team, okay, maybe a big team like we had there would have taken them more than a week to get that same result. And still, I don't think it would have been as solid. That's a lime plaster that we typically finish it, but not always. This is another project. It's much hotter climate in the Northern Cape. So here you can see we'd use a metal flash plate at the bottom for a drip, pre-fix the windows. And nowadays, that was, in retrospect, those vertical supports, pre-fixing the window beforehand were a bit thin. So we beefed that up a bit these days. That's a lintel going on. There you can see the dry fix. This is a little tourist facility, and there you can see again we only had a bath, and yeah, you can see there the bales waiting. They're busy drying, half drying before they get stacked. So guys are having a lunch break and waiting a bit for them to dry. In fact, some of them start to dry too quick. So you can see there's a shade cloth, so we had to actually prevent them drying too quickly. Otherwise we would be building with wouldn't have any tackiness left. And there you can see the kind of cobbing holes. So you start to work that surface of the wall as you build it. There you can see jumping on again, horizontal stabilizers. This had lovely sandstone in our area. You can see you get a sense of how tough those bales are, those cob bales. They're heavy, so you need at least 2 people to carry them. But you can see that was a team of 6 guys. We put up that wall that you're looking at there in one day. But as I say, it's like a solid cob wall, and with super insulation and all the thermal mass you'd ever want. So to me, this is actually an amazing way to build. It just I don't know in much wetter, damper climates whether it would work, because might not dry out quick enough. But certainly for many parts of the world, this is a fantastic way to build if you have straw and earth. So you get you can see, we leave little gaps for rebates for the plaster, all that sort of thing. They're all little tricks of the trade. You get a kind of stuff falling off. So when you refill your dip bath, you get a lot of straw in the bottom and more of the grit, the sands and so on, salts, but still with clay, and so that actually you clear out before you refill the bath, and that's kind of ready-made cob that you then use to fill some of the gaps. There you can see with an earth plaster with fine straw, and that was that little tourist facility. Okay, and then this is another owner builder house, recycled windows and all sorts, owner sourced. You can see the dry fit. So I'm just going to run through quickly. There you can see this one had we had old braai stand, which actually was a much better thing than a bath, because the bath's a bit narrow and also sometimes difficult to lift up. These were at a higher height, so it was easy on your back. And you can see also a cement mixer there, so that's a typical tool that's easy to hire or whatever. So and that really helps to mix your slip. I call it a slip. It's not really a slip, but it's a yogurt mix of earth, plaster, or cob, which will become cob. You mix that up much faster. You obviously got to add your water before you put in the clay, and and then that's getting prepped, and you typically have at least 2 bars or dip tanks. So there you can see the sort of setup, the soil sieved and then goes into the thingy mixer, then into the tray, and you're laying out course by course. It's busy waiting to dry a bit before it goes into that panel, and then you can see being restacked in the same day. There you can see some of the gaps. Sometimes we just stick straw in there and then kind of smear some soil over again, some earth, and so as I say, it really, these walls fly up, and you do have to work them. If some of the challenges of workshops are people lose enthusiasm toward the day or the end of the day, or they slack off, and then they don't kind of do the follow-up cob work. So it's important to sort of to follow up and work that clay, so that if it flat it off, and deal with all the hollows and dips, and kind of compact it so that it gets much stronger. This is another owner builder. There you can see how you leave that strip in the middle for the insulation. That you're trying not to get the clay to sort of bridge across the bales. It can be difficult, but that's how it is. There you can see that sort of ready mix cob, if you like, coming out the bottom of the bath. Onto and then just we'd spread it out in the sun to sort of dry off more before and then you've got a nice stiff cob ready to got to pluck onto the wall, as I say, for those dips and hollows. There you can see in that bath as well just how kind of yogurt sort of mix. So it's pretty runny. It's, as I say, really a yogurt consistency. But then actually, as it happened, it started to kind of drizzle. The weather got a bit funny, so we actually, on that particular workshop, we made a stiffer mix. We added more grit again, and soil and earth, and got and so the dipping is a bit closer to an adobe kind of consistency. So maybe it took a bit more work, but just the fact of being able to stand and do it like that, it's a hell of a lot easier than trying to put it on a vertical surface that's kind of a springy surface. There you get an idea of the cobbing, so that you got the cobbing stick, we call them. I don't know what you guys do in the UK, because it's much colder. So you're using your hands a lot, and with a kind of cobbing stick, and you're pushing and twisting that stick to kind of knit the straws and the layers together. But obviously it's also aerating it for drying, for curing, and it's also compacting that clay. And the more you work it, the more solid it gets, as in normal clay. And then you can put you can go straight onto an earth plaster if you want, And you can see, so it's very efficient, you know, with a finely chopped fiber, whatever it might be, straw, what have you, and then you can kind of plaster onto that surface pretty easily. In this particular job, you can see it's a more straw, messy kind of wall, and that's because the client wanted to build the bales flat and rather than on edge. So they're thicker walls, similar kind of insulation value, but actually not as well. I think the on edge is actually more suited to this method, and less material, slightly less thinner walls, just the same amount of insulation, because the straw insulates more if it's lying vertically. This is a project in Mpumalanga. So these projects are from all around South Africa, and quite a wide variety of different climates. This is kind of nearer the Kruger Park, the Lowveld's much hotter there. And there they kind of have, you can see a kind of crib for the dip bath. And sometimes if it was getting too hot, you can see sort of having to sort of dampen the surface a bit if it had, you know, need a bit of workability. This was students came from Germany. They'd done light clay straw before, but it took too long, so they would come for 6 weeks, but wouldn't be able to leave a finished building. So they asked me to help them with the straw bale building, because I wanted to be able to leave it plastered. So basically, we ran a workshop, 2-day workshop, open to the public as well, architects and so on, as well as the German students. So on most of the day or after lunch was lecturing, and then on the afternoon we'd then do some practical. Well, we'd actually do soil testing as well in the morning, but just to get people around that, and then do wall raising just of the dry fit in the afternoon or after the lectures, and then in the next day on Sunday we then do a full day of the cob bale work. So here you can see we had quite a lot of people. So we had 3 dipping tanks, although only 1 cement mixer. One of the challenges was, again, you know, curveballs with workshops and relying on other people. And you arrive, you think everything's ready, and then we found out the bales were pretty, very worst quality bales I've worked with in terms of compaction. They were pretty, you can see, pretty floppy, not so compacted and kind of regular shapes. So you can see kind of had some of the challenges, but yeah, clay kind of fixes everything, kind of makes it right. So that was at the end of that 1-day workshop. We did 3 panels. And then 4 days later, I came back. The team who I trained, part of the team that carried on with the work, were then able to kind of pretty much finish up that by the week. And then 2 weeks later, after that workshop, they'd finished the lime plastering, although that was still curing. But they had to leave on a plane, so they had no choice. And they worked really hard, these German students. And but you can see in 2 weeks, the building was finished. So, you know, compared to the old way we used to build with straw, it's just chalk and cheese. I'll never go back to building the other way. And then this was actually one of the early projects I'd done in Greyton, a very wet area. And we needed to do some 18 years later, 17 years later, the clients asked me to do a workshop for them. And in the early days, we hadn't put any reinforcing in the wall in terms of intermediate supports, odd pole here and there, but just insufficient. And so the walls had buckled and moved away from the window and so on. So we wanted to rebuild this gable wall. So we had to demolish this existing wall. And it was bloody hard to get out. I can tell you, to demolish that wall was not an easy thing. And the straw actually came out looking newer than, if I go back to the photo, it actually came out newer than the new bales we just purchased. They look brighter yellow. They were in perfect condition. And this area gets a lot of rain, over 1,800 millimeters of rain a year. And it's up against the mountain, so it gets quite cold. And yeah, and we hadn't used a lime plaster on this. Actually, we'd used an earth plaster with a breathable paint. So yeah, it was testimony to how well that had withstood the weathering. So this was the rebuild. You can see kind of ladders, so triangulated ladders, so which weren't there before, that we now added to stiffen up that wall. I generally find if you're building on edge, non-load bearing, I'm not a favor of load bearing straw bale, although I'd love for simple things definitely, but for how the complex buildings, generally not practical in my experience, although maybe I'm just not good at it, so I don't know, or I haven't done enough of them to know just how good they can be. But anyhow, and our regs is another problem. So we just wouldn't get sign off if we had to say, well, the bales are holding up the roof. So it's easy to do an infill. You can put your roof up first and so on. And yeah, so there you can see the ladders, the dry fit, and then the workshop day we're putting up the dip bales. You can see putting in a bit of some bottled wool, like tubes of cut bottles with foil wrapped around for reflection to make kind of bottled light features. And then this is the last little project in KwaZulu-Natal. So it's again hot and humid, although this is inland close to the Drakensberg, so can get hot and humid in the summer, but it's summer rainfall as opposed to our winter rainfall in the Cape. And in winter it can snow there, so it gets freezing cold. So it's near the Drakensberg mountain range, so that's a big mountain range. So there you can see the dry fit. The clients had some kind of weird idea of putting trying to make a kind of cavity wall with weep holes, kind of weird. I wasn't a fan of that, but anyway, you can see all the supports, the ladder plates going in. So this is all done in the workshop. Putting the in this particular workshop, we put the ladders on, filled the gravel, then did the dry fit. There you can see sort of covering up, as you can see all the mist around. This is kind of a little bit drizzly, and then the morning came back to start the bale dipping. You can see our sieve and our cement mixer, and they're nice trays at a good height. You can see everybody working around. Getting that, and you can see the stiffer mix of earth here because of as I said, the condition was a bit humid. It was a bit wet, actually, a little bit drizzly almost. So we were worried about them not drying out enough in time. So we started with a stiffer mix, which seems to work. And again on this one, the client wanted the bales laid flat. So you can see we working the clay into the top ends, not the sides, not the flat end. So, the string side. So there you can see kind of staking them with bale needles, which you use to retie to help carry the bales, because they getting them out of a sticky bath can be difficult. The clay wants to kind of stick and stay in there. There you can see them all being laid out in their courses, stuffing loose straw between if there's kind of a bit too much of a gap. Kind of clout nails to sort of help the cob grip onto the pole, compacting the bales as you sort of build them, as you can see, and kind of bashing them straight. So sometimes that can be a challenge, is just to keep the walls straight, because we tend to forget about levels when we build with earth. So again, if you've got the vertical timbers, it does also help to kind of guide you. So you can see here we had a bit of a problem with that and took some extra bashing to kind of straighten up. You can also see all the kind of holes again from that cobbing. As I say, it's very important to work the surface as you build these walls. And that one you can see to get in, because we put the roof up first, so we're out the rain and everything. It's the most sensible straw bale, and you're working the shade and then that. But getting the top courses in and compacting them, you can see you've got to get a little bit inventive, and sometimes you little bales on their sides and so on. But there you can see you guys going each side. Okay, we're almost done.
Yes, thanks.
Okay. And here you can just see, going up, we're just putting tarpaulins to protect from the rain. That was in 4 years later after that workshop, I think. That's the building finished with its lime plaster, which was a garage living kind of quarter. Then they branched out to build their main house. So got me back to do a second workshop. This time built the bales on edge, not flat. There you can see the dipping, and Sometimes there was a funny little junction. You had to put the bale on its edge, on its head, and that's the group of participants. So it's a lot of fun, and as you know, working with earth is it has a whole positive spirit about it, and that is something that I think lives in the building. And for me, natural building is about process, and it helps us to live in harmony with nature. So it creates jobs and bonds between humans. It builds social cohesion. So yeah, I think
that's the theme running through today as well. So thank you, that's fantastic.
Okay.
Hurry along now. So questions for Andy are going to be done in a joint session at 3:50 or whenever we get there, because at the moment we're running a bit late again, which is great. So thank you very much, Andy.